Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com, and in this tutorial we're just going to be talking about strings. So all a string is a bunch of characters that can be placed either between double quotes or single quotes. So to give you guys an example, I could create a variable called first name, and I can assign it the value of Pedro, end it with a semicolon. Or likewise, instead of double quotes, I could use single quotes. Now these are just two ways of declaring a string. So now let's go ahead and print this onto the console so we can see that this is actually working. So I'm going to say first name, Control B, right click, Reveal in Explorer, double click, F12, and you can see that Pedro is printed out onto the console. But now I want to get into some of the gotchas of using a string. So let's head over back to our editor. And I'm going to hit Control B. And let's say that I want to say Pedro's something, right? So instead of first name, let's just say phrase. And I want to say Pedro's dog died, right? So that's what I want, Control S. Now you can see that Visual Studio Code is giving us a lot of errors, and there's a reason for that. But we're gonna head over to our browser, and we're just gonna run the code as is. And if I hit refresh, you can see that we're getting a syntax error. And that's because JavaScript is getting confused. So the way that JavaScript works is it sees the single quote and it says, okay, so you want to assign a string. So it says, okay, this is the opening, this is the close, but I have no idea what the hell is all of this. So I'm getting a syntax error. Now, in order to get rid of that, what you can do is use something called a \escape character. Now, all the \escape character does is it turns a special character into its string counterpart. So, for example, I'm just going to use \, and you can see that the error immediately gets removed. And the reason for being is, okay, JavaScript says, okay, this is the opening. It sees the \escape character and says, okay, what he means is he doesn't want this to represent a closing string. He wants the actual character of the apostrophe. And then it has the closing string here. So now let's actually test this out. Let's not forget to change first name to phrase. Control S to save. Head over to our browser. Hit the refresh. And you can see that Pedro's dog has now died and we're not getting any more errors. So the same thing can be said with the double quotes. For example, let's get rid of this. And let's say I want to say Pedro said, and then, I don't know, my dog died. Let's just stick with the example. So obviously I want quotes around what I said, right? Hit Control S to save. Head over to my browser and you can see that Visual Studio is already saying, hey man, this is an error. I don't know what you want. Go back to our browser, hit refresh. You see that we get the same error, syntax error. And it's the same problem as the single quotes. So I have a starting double quote here, an ending double quote here. So JavaScript says, okay, you want to assign a string here. But what happens is it doesn't know what the hell any of this stuff is. So the same way that we got rid of the problem with our single quote, we can do with double quotes. So I could use my escape character, \, and I could do a \ here. And you can see Visual Studio Code is happy. It has an opening double quote, a closing double quote. When it gets to this double quote, we have the escape character here. It says, hey man, I don't want this as a string. I want you to put the double quote character here, and I want you to put the double quote character here. So I'm going to hit Control S to save. Head over back to my browser. And now if I hit refresh, you can see it's working as intended. Pedro said, "My dog has died." So now let's head over to our editor, go back to Visual Studio, and let's say you don't want to use escape characters for whatever reason. So let's get rid of this and get rid of this. One way you could avoid doing so is by using the opposite from double quotes or single quotes. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say I want this to be in quotations, right? So instead of starting my string off with a double quote to match this, I can start with a single quote. And you can see that we're not getting any errors, and that's because JavaScript's not confused. I have a starting single quote here, starting single quote here, and when it gets to here, it says, okay, he means the literal double quote here and the literal double quote here. So if I was to go back to the browser, hit refresh, you can see that we get the same exact result without using escape characters. And if we were to do the single quote example, so we would just change this to double quote, and I think you guys pretty much get the picture by now. So let's say Pedro's dog is happy. And you can see that we're not getting any errors, and that's because here I have a double quote, I have my ending quote, so when it gets to the single quote, it says, oh, he just means the literal character. He doesn't mean that he's starting a new string. So if I head over to my browser, hit refresh here, you can see that we get the single quote, absolutely no errors, and everything's working out perfectly. And last but not least, let's head over to our browser, and we're going to talk about string concatenation. So I'm going to use my name as an example. So we're going to create two variables. I'm going to say var first name. I'm going to say Pedro. And then the second variable, we're going to say, call it last name and say Mercado. So right here. So now I have a variable that has my first name, a variable that has my last name. Now let's say I want to print these two out, but I want to combine them together. So in order to do that, we can use string concatenation. In order to do that, all you need to do is use the addition sign. So plus last name. Now if I run this in the browser, hit refresh, you see that we get Pedro Mercado. But most likely you want a space in between Pedro and Mercado. So let's head over back to our editor. And right now we could just add a string literal, add a plus, and now all we need to do is add the space. So it's going to say Pedro space and then Mercado. Head over to our browser, hit refresh, and you see that we get the desired result. Now, string concatenation works with strings, but let's say I wanted a number for some reason. So I could say plus, add a space, plus, and let's say 25. Now, we know 25 is a number, but what happens is when you add a string and a number, this number in the background in JavaScript gets converted into a string. So if I hit Control S to save, head over to my browser, hit refresh, you see Pedro Mercado 25. So this is all just one big string. And if we want to give another example, let's create a variable full name. I could say var full name, and full name is just going to be first name plus the space plus last name. End it with a semicolon. Instead of printing all this out, get rid of that, Control V, Control S, head over to my browser, hit refresh. you can see that we combined it into one variable called full name. So that's pretty much it with string concatenation.